You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It's Thursday, December 19th, 2024 at 7:35 p.m. Pacific time. And I thought that I would talk tonight about what can you expect if you earn security? What will be different from the way that your native attachment strategy operates to earning security? I often say you don't get a whole new brain when you earn security. If we could use a computer metaphor, you get new software to run the same uh, wetware, as my friend Jimmy would say, hardware. Um, because we are one of the creatures whose brain develops in relationship to the environment we're in after we're born, and the physical structure of the brain grows in response to the environment that we're in. If you have a secure brain, you have this brain that has this wonderful dynamic between the sympathetic nervous system, which is the thing that activates in alarm, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the thing that settles it down. And when you grow up in insecure, disorganized family systems, the brain doesn't grow in that way. If you grow up to be a dismissing adult, you grow up in an environment of neglect. And so you learned in childhood to suppress the sympathetic nervous system and hyperactivate the parasympathetic nervous system. What that does is allows you to suppress emotion, but also suppress the attachment system. It's a way of avoiding the painfulness of the neglect. If you're preoccupied, you develop a hyperactivating sympathetic nervous system. So you're very quick to respond and you're hyper vigilant about the environment, which is one of the things that you need in that family system. But you also learn to suppress the parasympathetic nervous system so that you can keep that hypervigilance going. And so you don't settle very easily. And when you're disorganized, it's all over the place. You could have a hyperactivated sympathetic nervous system and a hyperactivated parasympathetic nervous system, or a hypoactivated sympathetic and a hypoactivated parasympathetic, or any combination, which could be reactive in the experience of the moment as it unfolds. One of the reasons that it's very difficult to relate to disorganized people is that they're so unpredictable in terms of how they'll respond, and it's characterized by that setup. You know, if your sympathetic nervous system activates and your parasympathetic nervous system activates, it's like you're standing on the brake and the gas pedal at the same time. The whole car is shaking, the tires might even be spinning, but you don't go anywhere in that sense. So you have the brain that you have, and you don't get a new brain when you do this work to uh, engineer secure functioning. What you do is you learn the system of secure functioning. So part of this is cognitive, understanding how secure functioning relationships are supposed to operate and begin to negotiate relationships so that they're operating on a secure basis. So what that really means in a simple way is that you agree to take care of somebody, the whole person of somebody, in the way that they like to be or need to be taken care of. And they agree to take care of you in the way that you need to or like to be taken care of. And it's not transactional in the sense that you negotiate each act of care, but you take on the whole care of the person and they take on the whole care. And you collaborate with each other to make that easier, which is to say, you authentically tell somebody what it is that you need to feel taken care of, and they collaborate with you to discover ways that they could express that to you so that you feel taken care of. And you do the same for them. Would it?
So you're saying after you earn security, right? Taking care
Right.
of because the other person would be unpredictable, for example. Because you cannot collaborate before if the person is going through different emotions and needs to be alone to be calmed down.
Well, if you're, yeah, a fearful avoidant person needs to be alone to regulate. And if you wanted to, if you were already in a relationship with somebody like that, then what you would need to do is renegotiate the relationship. And sometimes that renegotiation works and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on whether they feel that their needs in the relationship are well taken care of and don't see a need for renegotiating. Lucy is wanting to come in.
So that would mean like emotional soothing for a disorganized person would mean I'm telling the other person that, oh, if you need to be alone, you can be alone. That's a renegotiation.
Um, well, not necessarily. How does that affect their commitment and obligation to take care of you in the way that you need to be taken care of? Can you accept that they would be absent for periods of time and that you would then go without regulation? That wouldn't really work very well for most people. They take on the responsibility of your care. They don't get to relinquish the responsibility of your care so that they can isolate to regulate. In fact, you're supposed to be the one who's helping them re-regulate so that they don't need to isolate, which means that they would have to be willing to have you help them, which means they would have to tell you that they needed it. All of these things are what the disorganized person doesn't really do. They get dysregulated and they disappear without explanation. And then when they're re-regulated, they show up again without explanation. And that probably wouldn't work very well. A dismissing person, of course, who is receiving all of the care in the relationship doesn't really see the need to renegotiate the relationship because they're fine. And that you're not fine is your problem and you should figure it out. That's kind of how they think about it. But it's certainly nothing that they would have to do in order to change the way that they're relating in the relationship. Um, and so the this is a process of figuring out what it is. Lucy, I have a fearful avoidant dog. She comes over and demands to be picked up, and as soon as you make the gesture to pick her up, she runs off. um, the one of the things about this, of course, is that when you form a relationship, and many of us have relationships already, and we're attempting to renegotiate them. The secure functioning relationships actually work better, and you get better support in doing them. So part of it is understanding the advantages of a secure functioning relationship versus an insecure, disorganized relationship. Uh, you have to be able to mentalize well enough. You have to be able to emotionally regulate well enough to participate in that. So there's often things that have to happen before you can move all the way into secure functioning relationships. And when you look at the distance from secure functioning relationships, that is the spectrum of attachment strategies, the closest to secure functioning, believe it or not, is somebody who's dismissing. And the reason for that is that their mentalizing skills are better. They use the suppression of emotions as the main way of regulating, but they do have a capacity to explore, which is one of the things that's necessary to figure out the advantages of secure functioning as opposed to insecure, disorganized functioning. If you can convince a dismissing person to explore the potential of secure functioning relationships, they have already all of the skills that they would need to explore that. And if they were able to discover, which is likely that it's a better way for them to get through the world, they then have the capacity to gather the skills that they would need in order to do that. Somebody who's preoccupied in the organized end of things has less capacity to mentalize, and it's harder for them to see the advantages of that. They also have a much more impacted experience of authenticity. When you look at a dismissing person, because they've grown up in an environment where they learn to idealize, what that process of idealization was sequestering and hiding what's the authentic experience for them, but it doesn't mean that they don't have it. They just don't express it because they maneuver everything into the idealizing expression, which was what was required of them. But if they can touch into what's authentic for them and pick well and who they begin these experiments with and express themselves authentically and see that that actually gets their needs met in a better way, they understand that. They have the capacity for mentalizing that. And so they can move quite rapidly into negotiating secure functioning relationships. They have to see the value of the attachment, but and they have to uh, move out of an orientation for uh, secondary exploration, the gathering of time, energy, and resources. They tend to be oriented around that because they need to have resources to transact relational care. But as soon as they see that actually there's a possibility of exploration and they see the advantages to themselves in that, they can move in that direction and begin to develop those skills. Somebody who's preoccupied, who's invested in pretend mode, who may have very little understanding of what is their authentic expression, is going to have a much harder time with that because they have to begin to mentalize at a rate that they don't. And also, they don't explore that well, and they don't have good capacity for emotional regulation. And so there's more to do really in a preoccupied mind than there is in a dismissing mind in order to move toward security. And then depending on the level of disorganization for that group of people, the mentalizing is very low there, and the emotional regulation skills are not adequate, and so they're constantly in a state of emotional distress. The fearfully preoccupied person experiences these extremes of emotion and feels completely helpless to do anything about it. And so they become reliant on other people to help them emotionally regulate. And the fearful avoidant person isolates themselves and restricts stimulus in order to regulate themselves. Disorganized people really, by the time they reach their 30s or so, they're so disappointed in the way that relationships go that they voluntarily withdraw from participating in relationships, that it isn't so destabilizing. They can be alone, which is painful in and of itself, but it's still less difficult than trying to navigate a relationship. So mid to late 30s, many disorganized people simply have made the decision to try and go it on their own and have very little intimate contact with other people. Christian?
George, two questions. First, when you come into secure attachment, can you use that extra brain power to like mine Bitcoins with your mind? The first one. Uh, my second question is,
There's an app, you could do it on your phone.
okay. My second question is, like, I'm curious about sometimes like this period when uh someone becomes so disappointed that they kind of withdraw. Do you find that there's a pattern with people that have a more preoccupied tendency at some point kind of withdrawing or shifting to a more of an avoidant looking strategy where they kind of withdraw or like it'll like that allows them to put the preoccupation kind of at arm's length?
I don't think that that's what happens. I think that preoccupied people would like to be in relationship and they still have that kind of mental strategy going.
Mhm.
The fantasizing about it, but it's very confusing and very disappointing, and it also makes life very chaotic for them. And so they really opt out of pursuing it because they want their lives to work better. But there's still, say, a longing or desire for that to happen. It's with fearful avoidant people that they give up on relationships and really make a decision not to do it and make plans for their life to be basically on their own. In the meditation world, of course, you hear it as people wanting to go meditate in a cave somewhere, figure out how to never need anyone ever again and still be happy. That's how you hear it in the meditation world when they come
Until until they start seeing faces in the cave walls, I'm sure, and then that triggers the attachment again.
Well, it's very amusing to me, this whole idea of meditating in a cave, because the romantic notion is that you're completely alone in a cave somewhere in the Himalayas, right? That's the visualization. And so when we used to go to Myanmar before the Civil War, I would take people to cave monasteries so that they could see what a cave monastery was actually like. And you'd go into this monastery, the one that we used to go to, they had 110 monks in residence at the cave monastery, and a whole thing outside of the experience of that. And then you go into the cave and it's furnished. There's like bedrooms and there's living rooms, and they've dug this thing out of the side of the mountain. And yes, there are six monks in residence. That when we were there last, there were six monks in residence in the cave, but they were in constant contact with other cave meditators and also the people that came in and out from the monastery to provide all of the needs for them to be in the cave. So I just like to offer that picture of what a cave monastery is actually like. Did you have a question there? Let's see.
I was gonna say, yeah, the people might opt out of being in the relationship, but I think the longing is infinite. Like you can never overcome that piece of a person's mind. I've seen like even like a tiny gesture could bring up the longing like right away. So it just feels like a part of them is still hopeful that that might happen.
Um, I think that's true maybe early on, but it does settle into this that's never going to happen, and I'm not putting any energy into trying to get it to happen. I think that would
Really?
be a way to think of it. One of the things about chaotic relationships is that they consume all of the energy for exploration and trying to stabilize the relationship. And so you have the deficit of no exploration, which is painful in itself. And then you have the chaos of the relationship. And at a certain point, to provide any meaningfulness in your life, you need to push into the exploration, which means you need to stay out of the chaos of the relationships that you're able to form. And so I think that that's really what drives it. And as soon as you figure out that you can use that energy to derive some meaningfulness for life, allure of entering back into that chaos comes less and less. Also, the way that relationships form and the way that aging affects you in our society. When you're younger, you meet lots and lots of people. So there's all of these potential encounters. And as you get older and you settle into some kind of work life, uh, you meet fewer and fewer people, and so that the opportunity for the encounters lessens. You have this marvelous energy and youth in your 20s where you can dance until dawn and still show up bleary-eyed at work. But you get toward the end of your 30s and you can't do that anymore. And so often we have to make a choice between being able to function in supporting ourselves, and the relationships give way. One of the other things about, particularly for disorganized people, is you look at people and they seem to be able to make relationships work, and it's baffling as to why you, who are equally a good person, can't seem to do it. But you don't mentalize well enough to be able to piece it apart to understand why that is. And as you develop your mentalizing skills and you're able to see in a clear way what it is that's happening, it begins to make more sense to you why that is. Uh-huh.
Is mentalizing, I've been noticing that mentalizing has to do something with the aspect of time, a continuity of a thought, a continuity of a thought or an idea that you can link together.
Right. Yes, exactly.
And you have to like just hold it just longer so that you can have the big picture and it works.
Right. And you can assemble meaning by trial and error, experimentation, which is part of the exploring piece that comes in.
I thought it was more of like developing attention more than mentalizing, simply attention development.
Well, you need that, yes. You need to be able to pay attention to things, but you also need to be able to, uh, in that, the diagram that I like to talk about is you need to understand the meaning that you make of the present moment experience that you have. So you have the object that can be sensed, the capacity to sense it when they meet and there's contact. You have a sensing event that is uh, that has no meaning assigned to it. It's just neutral. It's evaluated for urgency. That's mainly the body that is telling you whether it's urgent or not. It's pre-brainstem, really, the order of that. Then it gets into the brainstem and it's distributed throughout the brain, looking for pattern recognition of what that sensing experience is. And if it's recognized, then the whole thread of meaning that that pattern holds for you is assigned to the experience of the present moment. And then the present moment unfolds into conceptual reality, which has the underpinnings of the present moment, but it also has the context of the meaning that you assign to it. And some of these meanings go way, way back into the beginning of the autobiographical memory. And then you're operating in the meaning of it, which is both the present moment and how you've been conditioned into that. And you have to be able to mentalize all of that fast enough to know this is the present moment, which is informed by all of this meaning that I've had. And then you have to decide, what about that do you want to express? Then you have to be able to transliterate it into the terms that the other person will understand you, right? So I'm using this metaphor lately. Let's say you think strawberries are the best thing that ever happened, and you say to somebody, this is just like strawberries, expecting them to think it's the best thing that ever happened, but they think strawberries are dull and, tasteless. And so they think you mean that it's dull. And so they react as if it's dull, and you're confused by why they don't understand that you mean it's the best thing that ever happened. But that's because you didn't transliterate it into the terms that they would need, which would be, say, it's just like mangoes. Mangoes are the best thing that ever happened, according to that person. And so you're finally communicating, it's just like strawberries, but you're not saying that, you're saying it's just like mangoes, right? So that they understand you. Is that making sense? And then they respond back to you, and hopefully they transliterate it in such a way. And he says, "Yeah, it's just like strawberries. I love it. It's great." So that you're understanding each other. Whereas if you don't do that, you don't really understand each other. And then you modify your understanding of what the relationship is based on these exchanges of communication, which is a high level of mentalizing. But if you don't have the capacity to be able to do that, then that doesn't happen. So, for instance, if you look at the same diagram for a preoccupied person, is they understand what they want. They don't understand why it is that they want that. They don't understand how they've made the meaning of what they want in the present moment, because they can't mentalize fast enough to track the difference between the present moment and the meaning that they've assigned to it, and its origins in the past, and they express a gesture to get the thing that they want, but they don't transliterate it, particularly because they don't really understand what you want or what your needs are, because they can't mentalize that fast enough either. And then they track whether they get what they want or not. So it's a quite limited system. If they don't get what they want, they just make another request in a slightly different way to see if they can elicit what they want. And you go through that cycle with a preoccupied person. Is that making sense?
So in the examples of strawberries, if I'm saying I love strawberries, it has to be expressed in a way that makes the other person understand why I like them.
Yeah. What's your favorite fruit?
Let's say dragon fruit.
Okay. My favorite fruit is cherries. Do you like cherries?
Yeah.
And if I was going to try to convey to you something that was absolutely my favorite thing, and I said it's just like cherries, would you understand me? Or would you understand it's like cherries?
It's like cherries.
You like them, but it's not the greatest thing that ever happened.
Right.
If I would say this is just like dragon fruit, because I know you like dragon fruit, then you would be oriented to what I was talking about. Even though for me, dragon fruit wouldn't do that necessarily.
I see. So you're using the other person's likings or dislikings
You're
as a way to.
using their definitions of meaning in order to communicate to them.
I see. In this case, more nouns, right? Using their.
Well, it's however you understand what it is that has meaning for them, or maybe that's a better way to do it. You're expressing it in terms of meaning that they understand, rather than meaning that you understand. You're not expecting them to
Oh,
have the
right.
same meaning assigned to everything that you have.
Wait, I just realized I've been doing this actually. Yes, yes. Didn't realize I was doing it consciously, but yes. Because I just want to make them understand so bad that I would go in their world and
Right.
use their language and their feelings. And so, okay.
Yes, that level of mentalizing means you understand you and you understand them. You know them well enough in intimate relationships. Of course, that's the idea. And you're able to talk to them in their meaning, and they're able to answer you in your meaning, so that you're actually communicating. where we when we don't mentalize fast enough and we don't really track that in other people, we don't keep track of the other person, we don't really get to know the other person. We're in constant states of miscommunication because we're not using the right meaning to describe the thing that we're experiencing for them so that they understand us. That makes sense.
Sorry, the only complaint I got about this, because I got too much into this, that I got the complaint that I'm, the sort of advice giving or like a therapist role was coming
Oh,
too much. And I was like, I couldn't get out of it because,
so
does that
if
make
you can
sense?
avoid giving advice, I would recommend it.
It's not like giving advice, but just using their terms so much that they thought that I'm getting in
Oh,
the a mode of being higher than them, or like they just sort of talking as if I'm higher.
yeah. So it's a little out of balance.
Yeah. Thank you.
Christian.
George, I guess for like, would you agree to this kind of formulation that you can kind of spontaneously employ whatever metaphor you want, and it may not hit, but you also can mentalize by paying attention to the effect that it has on the other person to see if they like, you can read their face, you can read their
Yes,
reaction,
yes, yes.
and
That's
if not, you can always ask if you're not sure.
that number three is really making sure that they've understood you and receiving their communication about it. So that's the third part of that. And then the fourth part is moderating your understanding. Um, when you move into security, of course, what are the big changes that begin to happen when you do that? For dismissing people, you undertake the collaboration of relationship, which means you make a decision to actually take care of the other person and you make a decision to be interested in their exploration. When you really look at the way that secure functioning relationships take off and what really causes them to be long lasting is that they're regulating for you and you're regulating for them. You've learned how to take care of them in the way that they need to be taken care of, which they will highly value because it makes exploration easier. They've learned to take care of you in the way that you need, which you really value because it extends dramatically the capacity to explore. And then if your primary exploration is relatable enough to their primary exploration, there's a synergy that happens, an exchange that happens. You come rushing back and express the things that you've discovered in the exploration that you're doing. And they're interested in hearing about it because it's actually helpful to them in the exploration that they're doing. And then they come back and they express to you the exploration that they're doing. And you're really interested in that because aspects of their exploration are helpful to you in your exploration. So there's this synergy that takes off that each of your explorations, while different and of primary meaning to you, support and encourage the other's exploration, and it takes off in a way that makes these relationships really resilient and really long lasting. That's the thing that happens. In preoccupied uh, minds, the emotional regulation piece is important. The mentalizing piece is important. And what that allows is the proximity seeking that is essential to the preoccupied mind so that they can feel emotionally regulated changes in that you're able to reorient toward your own emotional life and you're able to regulate your own emotional life, which opens up the possibility for solo exploration, which opens up really for the first time primary exploration for somebody who's preoccupied. Most of the time, preoccupied people support other people's exploration without having much in the way of their own primary exploration because they can trade the support for proximity to the person. And that works well for a dismissing person. They engage in exploration. The preoccupied person supports them. but the deficit that comes from not having a primary exploration creates a dissatisfaction, a sense of deprivation in the preoccupied person. And so, as you begin to turn your attention to yourself and you get the support to develop your own exploration, and as you move into the world, you find that that sense of deprivation, that sense of dissatisfaction is satisfied by the exploration that you're doing. If we look at these in terms of these views, secure people think of themselves as capable people, and they think of the world as a place that will meet their needs, and so they move through the world in this way. I'm capable of getting my needs met, and the world is going to reciprocate by meeting my needs. The dismissing people think at the core they're fundamentally defective, and but that's unbearable, and so they inflate themselves with these notions of I'm better than everybody else, I'm the greatest thing that's happened, and they think that I would participate in collaborative mutual relationships with you if you're actually up to it. But since you're so clearly not up to it, I feel comfortable in taking from you what I want. And that changes into this collaborative relationship where there's mutual care, but at the core of that is this a sense of being completely incapable. The reason that people who develop a dismissing attachment strategy feel that way is because all of the attempts that they made in childhood to get their caregivers to be responsive to them failed. And what you begin to notice as you engage in relationships with people that are mutual and gratifying is that core sense of defectiveness gives way, and you're able to understand that you will be met in relationships, and it's a wonderful relief from that terrible, bitter sadness that most people who are dismissing sense. And because dismissing people really keep their authenticity private and separate, that loneliness that is so often a, a primary experience of dismissing people gives way to a sense of being connected and really a sense of being loved and delighted in, which is something that dismissing people don't really know. They know idealization, but idealization is a transactional way of relating, and that sense of delight, that they can actually be delightful by not having to do anything, not having to trade anything, is something that's marvelous when they really begin to take that in and it touches them. Preoccupied people have the sense that they're somehow broken and defective, but everybody else knows what's going on, and all they have to do is connect to somebody and then they'll be saved. And what changes for them is they turn their attention back to themselves and they begin to be able to regulate their own emotional experience, so they don't have to be dependent on somebody else to do that for them, which opens up the capacity to explore and derive meaning in their lives, which is really centered on themselves. And so they move from that dissatisfaction and deprivation of trying to use somebody else's exploration to derive the meaningfulness of their life and find meaningfulness for themselves in the way that they negotiate the world. And that is marvelous. Disorganized people see themselves as fundamentally broken, and they see the world as malevolent and dangerous. And that's very inhibiting, very restricting. And what happens for disorganized people is, and it varies a little bit, fearfully preoccupied people need to do all of the work that preoccupied people need to do to settle that. the emotional regulation is particularly important for disorganized people because their primary means of emotional regulation is dissociation. And so you have to come out of the dissociation, as Mudit was saying earlier, that development of the capacity to mentalize, to stay concentrated so that you can solve more and more complex problems in your life also means that you can take on much richer sources of exploration and derive a greater sense of meaning from it. If you can learn to regulate your emotions enough that you can begin to explore for meaning and you can settle the dissociation, then you can move into collaborative relationships in a way that were beyond your native capacity. Fearful avoidant people have a sense that if they make a mistake, that they'll be harmed, and so that life or death anxiety gives way to a sense of safety in a collaborative relationship. Again, working with the dissociation through development of emotional regulation and then developing continuity and exploration. Fearful avoidant people are better explorers than fearful preoccupied people, but they don't have the capacity for consistency, so they don't get much beyond the beginning. One of the ways to describe the experience of disorganized people is some beginnings, sometimes even good beginnings, a few middles, and almost no finishes because of the way that the dissociation affects their capacity to mentalize. Complexly disorganized people, of course, swing back and forth between fearful, preoccupied, and fearful avoidant, and so they tend to function even less well. And you come out of that once you begin to notice that you can sustain relationships that are actually supportive and that you can sustain your exploration and balance the secondary exploration, the gathering of time, energy, and resources with the primary exploration, life is not so chaotic. You're not constantly on the precipice of things completely falling apart, and you can begin to build a meaningful life. One of the things that's consistent through insecure and disorganized people is this sort of free-floating, ongoing anxiety that people have, which never allows you to settle into a sense of security. And that also changes quite a bit. To the point that actually it can settle out altogether, that it isn't that you don't have a fearful response to things, but your capacity to emotionally regulate is so good that it doesn't, those fearful moments, those moments of anxiety no longer prevent you from taking the actions that you need so that you can continue to develop your life. Whereas when that free-floating anxiety in before gets too extreme, really the way to deal with it is to stop pushing forward and waiting for it to pass. I use the example of having written a book called The Lower Manhattan Dormitory Effect, which took 12 years to write, but mainly because the anxiety of working on the book would get so great that the only way that I could regulate it was by stopping working on the book. So there would be a few months of work on the book and then a few months off and a few months on and a few months off. Having earned security, I then wrote another book called Punch Outs, and I was able to do that one in 2 years. And when I look back on the experience of doing it, the fearfulness that might arise from really trying to be as authentic as possible would arise, but it wouldn't derail the forward motion of creating the book. Whereas in the previous experience, the anxiety would get so intense that I I would rather fail than complete it, so that I could be relieved of the intensity of the anxiety, really that fear of success that's so common in insecure and disorganized people changes. Would it?
So you're saying after 3 months you were taking a break because of the anxiety of success, you mean? What will happen with the book?
Well, fear of success, you may or may not recognize that it's actually the success that is frightening you. And we don't necessarily mean that the book then becomes widely popular or not, but that you've created something that is what you wanted to create. And in doing so, exposed yourself to the reaction of the world. If you make something that's insincere and out of pretend mode, it doesn't matter what the reaction is, because it's not going to be wounding in the way that if you make something that is an authentic representation, I like to say, of your aesthetic, for instance, if you're an artist, and the world reacts in a harsh way to that, that's much more painful.
It's like fear of being
And
exposed.
yeah, and dismissing people anticipate rejection. That's what they experience. Preoccupied people anticipate being abandoned. Disorganized people anticipate being killed. And so the intensity of that anxiety can really get into a life or death level of distress. And to come out of that, really the only way that I was able to do it was to stop working on the project. But then, of course, after a couple of months of that, the dissatisfaction of not having any exploration going on would come up, and then you'd begin the work again. So it was this balance between relieving the anxiety and relieving the deprivation of not exploring very well. And to live a life when you're thrown between uh, abandonment terror or rejection terror or terror of death and deprivation is not the most ideal way to move through this short, brutish, wild, and precious life that we have. Is that making sense? You come into this place where you actually begin to expect that the world will receive the thing that you have to offer the world and respond in a way. I find most of the time the world is completely indifferent, and which is certainly not being killed, and not actually that frightening. But if you
So
needed the work to inflate you so that you didn't have to touch into the terrible sadness, then that wouldn't be acceptable, right? You'd need it to be something big, which means, and since you're not actually attempting to express authenticity in the work, that would be different. So that secure place of creation is very different from the insecure, disorganized places of creation. And so what you'll find is that you move out of that pretend mode into the desire to express yourself authentically, so that you'll be seen, you'll be known, you'll be understood, and you have the sense of anticipating that in a way that you'll be delighted in, you'll be accepted, which is that security that comes. That making sense? Imagine going through the your life with the anticipation that if you expressed yourself authentically, people would be delighted to understand your point of view, which is the place we really want to get to. Would it?
So for me, my question is not so much, maybe it is underneath, but it's more of like, is it worth doing after 3 months? Is it worth doing? Is it worth doing? Like there's a sense of worthlessness that's coming on the project.
Right, which is the devaluing of the project, which is a way of regulating the loss of it. if you can't work on the project because the anxiety is that it causes to work on it is too great, how are you going to regulate the anxiety? And a dismissing mind would devalue the project so that it wasn't something that mattered whether you did it or not. That would be the
But
strategy.
I'm still looking for something. Yeah, right.
Right. But then you still have to fill the deprivation. What are you going to fill that with? Idealize something else and then maybe going off to do something else. But then as you did something else and it approached fruition, most of the time the anxiety increases the closer you get to finishing it. Because when you finish it, then you have to present it. If you're anticipating rejection, the way that you delay the rejection is by delaying the completion of the project. But then you're back into the deprivation of not exploring, and you're in this place of this back and forth between not being able to complete it because you're delaying the rejection and then the deprivation of not exploring. So you can't really settle in there. One thing that with procrastination, which is one of the solutions to this, is you wait until you can't do your best. It's a hedge. And then you finish it rapidly and present it. And if it's rejected, the hedge is, I didn't do my best. I didn't have time to do my best. So they're not actually fully rejecting me because this isn't representative of my best. Whereas if you had done your best and they had rejected, that would be unbearable. But then also one of the ways to hedge it is to make it inauthentic, that it doesn't really represent you. So what is truly you is not on the line. But then you're back against the deprivation that comes when you don't satisfy that aspect of the activation of the creative authentic self. So that back and forth between the anxiety and the deprivation.
That's the same question as using the best use of your time. The worthiness is the same thing as best. Am I using my time the best way?
Right.
I'm not sure because I will know afterwards.
And if it's unexamined and you're a dismissing person, what you're thinking is, I need to gather resources so I can transact the best experience for myself. And the more that I have, the better the quality of the experience is. But still, that you're up against the problem of deprivation because you're not authentically expressing yourself. And so that the satisfaction that comes from the authenticity of yourself being seen and known and recognized and delighted in doesn't happen. And so the transactional relationship leads into the next transactional experience in that hunger for that authentic satisfaction, which doesn't come in those kinds of relationships. So it's a dilemma. I mean, there isn't a good way around it except going into authenticity, but then you have to deal with the conditioning that you have around your authentic expression. And if you didn't grow up to be secure, then it's going to be impacted because the childhood experience you had of the expression of your authenticity was going to be pretty negative in order for you to move away from that as the means of negotiating life. Makes sense? One of the things that also happens to us as we're moving into the expression of authenticity is that we pick the same kind of person that we've been in relationship to, and they're not going to be so excited about us expressing ourselves authentically. In fact, they're going to be rejecting half the time when we express ourselves authentically, which is going to reinforce our early conditioning. A preoccupied person who enters into a relationship with a dismissing person does not want intimacy because they've picked somebody who can't provide it for them. And so if you, as the dismissing person, would suddenly turn around and say to the preoccupied person that you are now interested in intimacy, they would be rejecting of it because it interferes with the safety that they have of not having to be intimate. They would have to come out of pretend mode in order to meet you in an intimate way, and that would be very challenging. Did you ever see a Fassbinder film called The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kamp? It really is about this dynamic. Throughout the entire film, the mistress of the house mistreats, abuses her assistant. And the assistant accepts. And then in the last few minutes of the film, when everybody has abandoned the mistress of the house, she turns to her assistant and says, I'm now ready to have an open, intimate connection with you. And the assistant picks up her suitcases, packs, and leaves. It's worth a look if you like Fassbinder. Anyway, how's that? Good enough? Shall we do a little practice? Settle into your meditation posture. Right? Let go of the meditation. How's that? Good. So we're coming up on the end of the year and the holidays, and so we're not doing too much for the rest of the year, except that January 4th, we're going to start a level 1. So for 4 Saturdays, and then we'll start a level 2 in February. And we're going to focus a little bit more on the series of half-day longs on Saturdays. So I think through really May, we're going to have something every Saturday for half a day. So take a look at that. We're doing our usual cycles for level 1 and level 2, but we're also going to offer for the first time a professional track cycle for helping professionals who are interested in the perspective of using this approach in the work that you're already doing. So we'll do that, I think, in February and March. We're going to also offer our addiction course, both the level 1 and the level 2. We tried the level 2 for the first time, which was meeting 3 times a week for an hour for 12 weeks. And I think that actually worked pretty well, so that we're going to continue to do that. So that's what we have coming up. Take a look at it if you're interested as it begins to appear on the website. I offer the teaching freely. Did you have a question? No? I offer the teaching freely, but I really do hope that if you're able to support me and the work that Mettagroup does, that you'll make a donation. There's a link for that on the website. Really appreciate your practice, and we will see you soon, I hope. Bye.